We were never told the truth about Middle Eastern politics. In schoolbooks we read about diplomacy, about the growth of trade, about cultural exchanges. But the biblical texts reveal another picture. Alliances were always a trap. They were not agreements for peace, they were matters of survival. And hidden inside these agreements was always betrayal. The Bible warned again and again, do not make covenants with the nations around you. The prophets spoke clearly, if the people of God seek protection not from the Almighty but from the powers of this world, they condemn themselves to slavery. The ancient treaties of Israel with neighboring kingdoms are not a story of diplomacy, but a story of decline. In the book of Exodus we read, do not make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, or they will become a snare to you. It was a direct warning. But Israel kept turning to the mighty empires for help. It seemed that alliances would bring security. In reality, they always brought disaster. Why does this matter today? Because modern politics repeats the same pattern. Agreements called peace deals turn out to be traps for entire nations. A treaty that looks like a guarantee of peace on paper becomes a step toward submission. And that is exactly what the prophets warned about. Today we are told, the Middle East is becoming stable thanks to new diplomatic accords. But have we not heard this phrase thousands of years ago? Was not the alliance with Assyria called a guarantee of safety? Was not the treaty with Egypt seen as a shield against enemies? And how did it end? With captivity, with ruin, with the disappearance of the nation. The prophets knew, an alliance with the strong always means the loss of freedom. Because the strong dictate the rules. Because the strong never give without taking. Because protection always comes at the cost of control. And that principle has never changed. In the ancient texts we see, the alliance becomes a symbol of slavery. That is exactly what happened to Israel when it trusted kings of foreign empires instead of God. And now, look at the present. The Abraham Accords, the partnerships between Israel, Arab states, and the United States. They are presented to us as guarantees of peace. But the archives tell another story. These treaties open the doors to even greater control. The real reason for these alliances never makes it into the textbooks. It hides in military contracts, in secret protocols, in digital systems of surveillance that are introduced alongside diplomatic ceremonies. In the Bible, an alliance is often called a snare. Because at the moment of signing it feels like a new beginning. But in time it proves to be a sentence. And this logic has not changed. We are told of progress, but behind every new treaty lies a new form of dependence. Like this video and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next revelations. Because what we are exploring is not just history. It is the key to what is unfolding right now. Ancient archetypes return. Empires that seemed long dead rise again in new forms. When we hear of agreements between Saudi Arabia and Israel, we must remember, the Bible already carries the warning. It says, when a nation seeks protection from kings, it loses protection from God. This is not just a religious phrase, it is a political law proven by history. We were taught differently. We were told that history is progress. That new treaties are the path to peace. But the ancient texts say the opposite, every alliance leads to another war. Because alliances are never built on trust. They are built on fear, on profit, and on control. Why does October become the decisive month? Because in this very time, across many eras, the most important treaties were signed. In this month took place coups, conferences, and secret meetings. And this is not coincidence. October has always symbolized transition. The month when old agreements collapsed and new ones opened the way to catastrophe. Today we see the same again. New alliances are born in autumn, and within only a few months they turn into instruments of war. Is this not a sign that history repeats itself? And what if we are the very witnesses of the days the prophets foresaw? Look closely at the map. The same territories, the same borders, the same players. Only the names have changed. Instead of Assyria, modern superpowers. Instead of Egypt, global alliances. Instead of Babylon, financial centers. But the principle is the same. And this means the script is playing out again. World leaders know, yet they conceal it. They speak of peace, but they prepare a new division of the world. The agreements they call historic become sentences for entire nations. This is the very sign spoken of by John, the alliances of nations that unite against God's people, a direct road to the end. When we read the ancient prophecies, we see they do not simply describe the past. They describe our headlines. This is not poetry, not symbols, it is precise warning. And if we fail to see it, we may become witnesses of a catastrophe we cannot stop. This document changes everything. The story of ancient alliances becomes a mirror for the present. And the real question is no longer what happened back then. The question is, what will happen tomorrow, when the new agreements in the Middle East come into force? We have always been told, strong allies guarantee safety. But the history of Israel tells another story. Whenever the nation sought help from the mightiest powers of its time, it found not protection but death. And the most terrifying example was the alliance with Assyria. Assyria was the superpower of the ancient world. Its armies destroyed everything in their path. Cities were laid waste, nations were deported, temples went up in flames. In the words of the prophets, Assyria appears as the rod of anger, an instrument of divine judgment. Yet for Israel, it became a temptation. A small kingdom, trembling before its neighbors, decided, if we make an alliance with Assyria, we will survive. And that was the very moment the fall began. The prophets warned. They shouted, "Do not seek strength in Assyria, for it will swallow you whole." But the politicians of that time listened not to the prophets, but to the diplomats. They thought they were being wise. They wanted to buy time. They wanted peace. But the treaty turned into catastrophe. It followed a familiar script. First came diplomatic gifts, offerings of gold, the signing of agreements. Then came military assistance. It seemed everything was working. But soon the moment arrived when Assyria began to dictate its own terms. The alliance turned into dependence. And dependence became slavery. Schoolbooks often describe this as clever politics. But the prophets painted another picture. They said, "A people who seek help from the oppressor will themselves be oppressed. For he who invites the predator into his house becomes its prey." And that is exactly what happened. The Assyrian armies did not become allies. They became executioners. This story sounds like it belongs to the distant past. But look at today's map. Do we not see the same thing? Small nations turning to superpowers for protection. They give up part of their freedom in exchange for temporary safety. But in the end, they fall under total control. What happened between Israel and Assyria repeats itself now in new forms. The prophet Isaiah wrote that the covenant with Assyria would end in shame. And so it did. Nations that trusted Assyria lost their land, their temple, and their very identity. Now look at today's so-called alliances for peace. Do they not become new forms of bondage? Loans, military pacts, digital systems of control, they look like protection, but in truth they bind nations with chains. The archives reveal another picture. Where official treaties appear as diplomatic breakthroughs, in reality they are acts of submission. Everything we were told about alliances was a lie. Because the real outcome is always the same: the strong dictate, the weak lose freedom. And here we see the October pattern. Many of the key treaties in the Middle East were signed in autumn. In this season, secret negotiations took place, agreements were sealed that changed the destiny of the region. October was always the month of decisions. But those decisions never brought true peace. They always brought a new war. And what if we are living in the very days the prophet warned about? What if today's treaties are not guarantees of peace, but a replay of the Assyrian script? Nations look for safety in the strong, but in the end, they lose themselves. It is the same mechanism, only with different names. The true reason never entered the textbooks. Because to admit it would mean confessing that history repeats itself. That all these diplomatic ceremonies are just a cover. Behind the scenes, something else is being prepared: control, war, a new division of the world. Official statements are nothing but a mask. But the biblical texts reveal the real meaning. Today, when we hear of alliances between Israel, the United States, and Arab states, we must remember the shadow of Assyria. This is not just politics. This is the echo of prophecy. And if we close our eyes to it, we will repeat the very same mistake. World leaders know, yet they conceal it. They call these treaties historic, but from the biblical perspective they are sentences of judgment. The prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. And now the shadows of ancient empires rise again. When history repeats, the end draws near. And now I want to ask you, do you see in today's Middle Eastern events the replay of the Assyrian script? Or is it only coincidence? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because this very discussion may help us understand whether we stand at the threshold of a new catastrophe. We were told that Egypt was an ally. That turning to it was a wise decision in times of danger. But the Bible says the opposite. An alliance with Egypt was always an illusion. It looked like a lifeline, but it turned into a noose around the neck. And this story repeats itself today in a new form. The prophet Isaiah called Egypt a broken reed. On the outside it looks strong, but lean on it and it snaps, piercing the hand and leaving you without support. That is what alliances with Egypt were like. The people of Israel saw it as a partner against Assyria, against Babylon. They believed that by joining forces with the southern kingdom, they could preserve independence. But the result was always the same: betrayal and ruin. The story of Israel with Egypt is a story of contradictions. On one side, Egypt was forever the symbol of slavery. On the other, politicians kept turning back to it, hoping to find salvation. And that was the greatest illusion, to look for freedom in the very place that once held you in chains. The prophets saw it as absurd. They cried out, "Do not go to Pharaoh, for he will not save you. He will use you, and then cast you aside." Why does this sound so familiar? Because the modern world does the same. Nations look for help from those who once enslaved them. They take loans from the very same senders that build debt traps. They sign military deals with those who also arm their enemies. This is not alliance. This is a trap, one that nations walk into willingly, deceived by the illusion of protection. The textbooks tell us that an alliance with Egypt was a rational choice. But the Bible shows another perspective. There it is written plainly, "Those who rely on Egypt's horses and chariots will fall with them." For trust in man is the road to ruin. History proved this truth. Every time Israel turned to Egypt for help, it lost more than it gained. Now look at the present. Western blocs promise support to Middle Eastern nations. They guarantee financial aid, military strength, new technologies. But along with that comes control. Loans become chains of debt. Military assistance becomes a reason for interference. Digital security systems become tools of surveillance. It is a new form of the same alliance with Egypt. And the result will be the same. The real reason never made it into the textbooks. Because then it would be clear, history is repeating. What they call help is actually dependence. What they call alliance is in truth slavery. And when modern states sign treaties in autumn, in October, we hear the clear echo of ancient scripts. Isaiah said, Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help without seeking the counsel of God. That is not just an ancient phrase. It is a sentence for every generation that seeks protection in human empires. And that sentence still speaks today. Nations look for stability, but receive dependence. They long for peace, but receive control. They dream of freedom, but end up in a pit of debt. Look closely at the news. Who plays the role of Egypt today? Who promises help, but presents the bill? Who speaks of peace, but sells the weapons? The answer is clear. It is the same powers that build global systems of influence. And these systems have nothing to do with safety. They have only one goal: control. This biblical symbol describes modern politics with precision. Egypt is the archetype of a nation that looks strong, but is a broken reed. And when we watch world leaders lean on today's pharaohs, we must understand, history is repeating. The prophets warned us. And if we fail to listen, we face the very same disaster. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. And they rise now. The October treaties become the new symbol of bondage. When politicians sign the papers, they declare, "This is a historic moment." But the prophets say, it is only another noose around the neck. The only question is how long before it tightens completely. And now I ask you, do you see that modern alliances are simply a new form of ancient Egypt? Or is it just coincidence? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your perspective may help us understand whether we stand before a new slavery disguised as peace. We have always been told that Babylon is only the past. Ruins, archaeology, memories of an ancient empire. But the Bible warned, Babylon is not just a city. It is a symbol that returns again and again. And each time it means downfall, betrayal, and slavery. In the days of the prophets, an alliance with Babylon seemed like a chance for survival. The politicians of Israel looked at the mighty kingdom and thought, here is the power that will save us from our enemies. They sent envoys, offered gifts of gold, signed agreements. It seemed like a new beginning. But in reality, it was the beginning of the end. For it was the alliance with Babylon that opened the doors to captivity, the ruin of Jerusalem, and the destruction of the temple. The prophet Jeremiah spoke plainly, "Do not trust Babylon, for it will destroy everything it touches." But the words of the prophets were ignored. Politicians saw only the benefits. They believed that a treaty with the great empire would bring protection. And that was the very moment the greatest disaster struck. Jerusalem fell, the temple was burned, the people were carried into exile. The alliance became chains. In the Bible, Babylon always appears as a golden cup filled with impurity and corruption. On the outside it shines. It looks attractive. But inside is poison. This is how empires operate. They offer an alliance that seems profitable, but hidden within that alliance is death. And this is exactly what we see today. The modern world has its own Babylon. It is not a single city, but a system. It is global financial centers that dictate rules to everyone else. It is corporations and banks that hold nations in dependence. It is diplomatic capitals where, behind closed doors, the fate of entire peoples is decided. We are told this is development, this is progress, this is globalization. But the prophets would call it the New Babylon. The true reason for these alliances never makes it into the news. For if we saw how they really worked, the illusion of peace would collapse. Official statements are nothing but a mask. Behind them hides control, a new division of the world, a new set of rules. And this is exactly what the Bible warned of. Everything we are told about alliances turns out to be lies. The real meaning is not cooperation, but submission. The archives reveal another picture. Every treaty called historic ended in war. Every alliance called peaceful ended in blood. This is the law that has operated from Babylon until today. And we cannot afford to ignore it. October once again becomes the decisive month. It is in autumn that treaties are signed which change the destiny of entire regions. It is in autumn that diplomatic meetings take place that reshape the balance of power. This is not coincidence. This is pattern. And every time it ends in catastrophe. For Babylon always proves to be the same, a shining cup filled with poison. The prophets declared, when the nations lift the cup of Babylon, they drink their own death. And we see it today. The treaty hailed as a breakthrough becomes a trap. The alliance presented as a guarantee of peace opens the way to war. Is this not the very sign that John warned of in Revelation? The shadows of ancient empires rise again. And we see how the modern world step by step repeats the script of Babylon. Politicians smile for the cameras as they sign agreements. But behind those smiles lies another reality, dependence and control. This is the very sign that cannot be ignored. So think about it, who plays the role of the new Babylon today? Is it a single city or a global system? Are the modern financial alliances and political blocs that very same golden cup? It shines on the outside, but inside it conceals poison. And every nation that signs with this Babylon will in the end lose its freedom. The prophets warned of this thousands of years ago. They said, when nations follow the path of Babylon, they seal their own downfall. History does not change. It only repeats itself in new forms. And if we do not see it, we become accomplices in our own catastrophe. World leaders know, yet they conceal it. They show us official images, but the real story is hidden behind them. The scandal, even the churches remain silent about, is that modern alliances are in fact new forms of Babylon. And if we understand this, then we must ask ourselves, how much longer will this system endure? When John saw Babylon in his vision, he heard the voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the great city." This was not just prophecy. It was a warning. And if we see the new Babylon rising again, it means its fall is drawing near. But with it will also fall those who place their trust in it. And now I ask you, do you see in modern alliances the new form of Babylon? Or is it only coincidence? Leave your comment, because your perspective may reveal what others cannot yet see. We have always been told that politics is about nations, armies, and treaties. But the Gospels reveal another picture. Even in the fate of Jesus Christ, a political alliance played the key role. And this alliance was the darkest of all, an alliance built on betrayal. When we read the story of the crucifixion, we notice a strange detail. Pilate and Herod, two rulers who were enemies, who never trusted each other, suddenly became friends. Why? Because they shared a common interest, to destroy the one who spoke the truth. This was not an alliance for peace, not an alliance for justice, but for convenience. And it became the symbol of how politics sacrifices truth. The Gospel of Luke writes, on that day Pilate and Herod became friends. They united at the very moment when the fate of Jesus was decided. Yesterday's enemies found common ground when it came to suppressing the truth. This was not coincidence. It is a pattern that repeats across history. When truth becomes dangerous to the system always forges alliances against it. Look at how it unfolded. Pilate found no guilt in Jesus. He said, "I see no reason for a sentence." But the crowd shouted. The religious leaders pushed. Politics demanded a sacrifice. And then Pilate found a way out, to hand Jesus over to Herod. This was diplomacy played out on a single body. To shift responsibility. To remove the burden from himself. And that step became the beginning of an alliance. Power made an agreement with power. Authority found compromise. But that compromise was built on the blood of the innocent. This alliance is the archetype of every political deal. For they always appear as quests for peace, but underneath lies self-interest. Pilate and Herod became friends not for truth, but for power. And this is exactly how alliances work today. When nations are told, "This is a peace treaty," you must always ask, who is being sacrificed? The prophets warned that nations would conspire against the Anointed One. And we see this in the story of Jesus. The alliance of politicians and religious elites produced a death sentence. This was not accident, it was script. And that script continues to unfold in our world. When churches fall silent, when politicians bargain, and when truth is buried, we see the shadow of the same alliance against Jesus. Now look at our time. How often do rival nations find common ground when it comes to controlling their people? How often do political opponents become allies when they face a threat to their power? This is not just politics. It is the repetition of the gospel model. Wherever truth threatens the system unites to crush it. The real reason will never appear in the textbooks. Because to admit it would mean confessing. Modern alliances work by the same principle as the alliance of Pilate and Herod. They do not seek peace. They seek compromise for the sake of their own gain. And the sacrifice is always those who dare to speak the truth. The archives reveal a different story. What the news calls a diplomatic breakthrough may in fact be a conspiracy against dissent. Where we hear the word stability, it usually hides the word repression. Where they proclaim historic peace, they are preparing a victim. And this model has not changed since the time of Christ. Look closely at modern alliances. Whenever a new system of control appears, digital passports, surveillance laws, global databases, politicians who yesterday were enemies suddenly unite. They tell us, it is for safety. But we remember the lesson of the gospel. Safety is always built on the blood of those who resist. Then it was Jesus. Today it is anyone who refuses to remain silent. The prophets warned of conspiracies of nations against the truth. The story of Christ showed it literally. But the modern world enacts it globally. Now it is not about one righteous man, but about entire nations. When they refuse to fit into the system isolates them. When they resist submission, they are excluded from alliances, crushed with sanctions, pressured with wars. It is the same mechanism, only on a larger scale. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. And this image, the alliance against Jesus, becomes the key to understanding modern pacts. They are never built on truth. They are always built on fear and self-interest. And whenever you see enemies suddenly become friends, ask, against whom are they uniting? For the answer is always the same, against the truth. And what if right now we are watching this script repeat itself? What if the nations that fight with words are secretly making deals against those who do not fit their system? Is this not the very same alliance of Pilate and Herod? Does it not mean that the world is preparing a new sacrifice? This changes everything. For now we see, political alliances are not only about economy or security. They are always about truth and lies, about light and darkness. And whenever the system builds an alliance, it is always searching for someone to sacrifice. It may be a man. It may be an entire nation. It may be freedom itself. World leaders know, yet they conceal it. They call these alliances peaceful, but their true nature is repression of dissent. This is the very sign the prophets warned of. And if we fail to see it, we risk becoming accomplices in our own defeat. And now I ask you, do you see in modern treaties the echo of that very alliance against Jesus? Do you recognize in them the willingness to sacrifice truth for gain? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because this story is not finished. And how we understand it will shape our future. We have always been told that the world longed for peace. But the biblical texts reveal another picture. Nations often gathered together to conspire. And these conspiracies always had one goal, to rise against the people of God and against the truth. What politicians call diplomacy, the prophets called conspiracy. And they warned, when nations begin to rage together, it is the sign of coming judgment. In the second psalm we find words that sound like an investigative headline: "Why do the nations rage, and the peoples plot in vain?" This is not just poetic imagery. It is a description of political reality. The kings of the earth rise up, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against His anointed. This is a model that repeats in every age. And when we read these lines, we see, it is not only about ancient times. It is about today. The prophets said again and again that the conspiracies of nations always hide another truth. They look like agreements for stability, but in reality they are aimed against truth. Nations unite not because they desire peace, but because they fear truth. And that is why they attack the one who brings light. This script worked against Jesus, against the prophets, against the people of God. And now it operates in modern politics. There is another important symbol in the scriptures. It says, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." This means that everything nations dismiss as worthless becomes central in God's plan. But for politicians, that stone is always in the way. That is why they conspire. They believe, if we remove the stone, we can build empires without obstacles. But history proves, every such conspiracy ends in collapse. Now look at the modern world. How many conspiracies of nations do we see today? Summits, conferences, secret negotiations. They gather together, smiling for the cameras, promising peace and cooperation. But behind those smiles hides another agenda: backroom deals about dividing territories, controlling resources, and taking joint action against those who refuse to fit into the system. This is exactly what the prophets described. Official statements are only a mask. The real protocols are always classified. History shows that behind every diplomatic agreement lies conspiracy. The archives testify, it was at such meetings that decisions about wars, repressions, and coups were made. Everything we were told about alliances turned out to be lies. For their real purpose was always something else. October once again becomes symbolic. It is in autumn that the largest international conferences take place. It is in this season that nations declare new security. But history teaches us, the louder the promises of peace, the closer comes war. This is the very script the prophets described thousands of years ago. And we must open our eyes to see it today. And what if we are living in the days of yet another conspiracy of nations? If those smiling diplomats we see on the screens are in fact preparing the script of new enslavement? Is this not the very sign that David spoke of in a psalm? The prophets emphasized, the conspiracies of nations are always temporary. They cannot withstand the test of time. For they are built on lies. But before they fall, they destroy the lives of millions. This is exactly what we see in the 21st century. Alliances created for control become the cause of wars, crises, and catastrophes. History repeats itself. And it can no longer be hidden. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. We watch as modern states replay the script recorded in the pages of Scripture. Then it was kings conspiring against the prophets. Today it is superpowers conspiring against nations. But the meaning is the same: to unite in order to silence those who speak the truth. World leaders know, yet they conceal it. They call it new order, new partnership, historic agreement. But the prophets would call it by one word: conspiracy. And if we close our eyes to it, we become part of their script. And now I ask you, do you see in today's international gatherings the echo of those very conspiracies the prophets wrote about? Or is it only politics? Share your thoughts in the comments, because here lies the most urgent question: is the world preparing for a new war disguised as peace? We were never told the truth about the final alliance of nations. In the textbooks it is called globalization. In the news it is called international cooperation. But the prophets called it by another name, the alliance of the beast. They saw in their visions the nations uniting in the last days. And this union would not be for peace. It would be a union against the saints. The book of Daniel paints a terrifying picture. The prophet sees a beast with 10 horns that devours nations. This is not just a symbol of empire. It is the image of a global system holding the entire world under its control. And in the book of Revelation, John writes of the beast that receives power from all the kings of the earth. This is the final alliance, where politics, economics, and religion merge to create total control. The prophets warned, it will not be an alliance for peace. It will be an alliance for war against the truth. In the ancient world, Israel watched empires form coalitions. Assyria, Babylon, Persia, they all built alliances to conquer nations. But Daniel saw something greater. He saw the final script, an alliance uniting all humanity against the law of God. This was not merely politics. It was the religion of power. And this is exactly the pattern we see in the world today. Look closely. When global organizations speak of a new order, is this not the echo of the beast's alliance? When nations sign global agreements touching economics, medicine, technology, and security, it looks like progress. But behind it lies something else. Step by step, a system is being built that leaves no room for freedom. This is the very system John described. All, both small and great, rich and poor, will be forced to submit to one order. The real reason will never appear in the textbooks. Because then it would be clear, world leaders have long been forging alliances not for peace, but for control. The archives reveal another story. A treaty hailed as historic is in reality a step toward a totalitarian system. Everything we were told about peace agreements has proven false. For these alliances always have one goal: submission. In October again come the summits, the conferences, the secret meetings. There the future of entire regions is decided. And the official words sound beautiful: stability, partnership, development. But the Bible speaks plainly. When nations unite in the final alliance, it is the sign that the end is near. This is the very script known as the alliance of the beast. The prophets warned, this alliance will look like salvation, but it will become disaster. It promises peace, but brings war. It speaks of safety, but brings control. It shows progress, but takes away freedom. This is the golden cup of Babylon, shining outside but filled with poison within. And what if we are living in those very days? If today's global alliances are the beginning of the final script? Look at the news. Nations that were enemies yesterday now sign agreements. Superpowers that fought for influence now build common blocks. It looks like stability. But in truth, it is preparation for the last alliance. And this alliance will not be aimed against individual countries. It will be aimed against all who refuse to live under the new rules. World leaders know, yet they conceal it. They tell us, it is cooperation. But the prophets would call it the alliance of the beast. And when we see global organizations rising to control economics, medicine, digital identity, we must recall the words of John: all who do not receive the mark will not be able to buy or sell. This is not distant future. This is reality taking shape right now. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. And they rise not only in the Middle East. They rise in global alliances that encompass the entire world. This is the very alliance the prophets spoke of, one that unites politics, religion, and economy into a single system. An alliance that looks like progress, but is a trap. And now I ask you, do you see in today's headlines the echo of this final script? Or is it only coincidence? Could this be the very sign the prophets warned about thousands of years ago? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because how we understand this may shape the choices of our future. We were never told that the calendar itself could be prophecy. We are used to seeing dates as coincidences. But in the Bible, dates and times carry crucial meaning. The prophets wrote of a time and half a time, of 7 weeks, of 42 months. These are not just numbers. They are signs. And when we look closely at modern events, we see them converge again to one point. And that point is October. October has always been the month of decisions. It was in autumn that key alliances in the history of the Middle East were signed. It was in this month that wars began, governments changed, and treaties were made that shaped the destiny of entire generations. This is not coincidence. This is pattern. And when we watch modern leaders gather in autumn to sign new agreements, we must recall the words of the prophets: God has set the times and the seasons. In the 20th century, many disasters and turning points came in autumn. October revolutions. October wars. October accords. Politicians may call this historic coincidence, but the prophets would call it code. October, the month that hides the script of the future. And that script does not lead to peace. It leads to new slavery. Look at the present. In October, world leaders meet to sign peace agreements. But the archives show, it was October documents that most often marked the beginning of catastrophe. In October of 1973, the war called the Yom Kippur War, or the October War, began. In October came diplomatic summits that divided the region. In October were made decisions that reshaped history. And each time, it was presented as the triumph of peace. But in truth, it was the beginning of new conflicts. The prophets warned, when nations make treaties in appointed times, those treaties become snares. They look like breakthroughs, but they turn into betrayal. History proves it. October is the month of illusions. Politicians show us beautiful ceremonies, but behind them hides another reality. Now, even deeper. In biblical symbolism, the number 10 always means fullness, the completion of a cycle. And October is the 10th month in the modern calendar. Could this be the sign that October marks the close of one cycle and the start of another? Could this be the reason why so many decisive events happen in October? It may look like coincidence, but for biblical thinking, it is a crucial signal. The real reason will never be printed in textbooks. Because that would mean admitting that politicians also bow to symbols. They believe in dates. They choose time deliberately. And when we see global summits held in October, we must understand, this is not just the calendar. This is code. The archives testify, in October something always happens that opens the door to a new era. But that era never brings peace. It brings crisis. This is not accident. This is pattern, woven into the fabric of history. And this is exactly what the prophets spoke of. And what if we are now watching this script repeat itself? What if the October agreements between Israel, the United States, and Saudi Arabia are not mere diplomacy, but a sign? What if October itself is the key to understanding biblical prophecy about the last days? This is the question we cannot escape. For it concerns not only politicians. It concerns each one of us. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. We see the modern world reenacting a script already written. And again, it converges to one point: October. This is the October Code. The code that warns, history obeys laws that cannot be overturned. World leaders know, yet they conceal it. They choose dates deliberately. They know that in October decisions are made that reshape the future. But we are told, it is just the calendar. It is just diplomacy. It is just history. The prophets, however, would say, it is a sign. And if we ignore it, we fall into the trap. And now I ask you, do you see in today's October events mere coincidence? Or could this be the very key hidden in prophecy? Could October be the month when the ancient script rises again? Share your thoughts in the comments. For in your perspective may lie the detail others have missed. We were told that new technologies were created for our convenience. That digital passports, biometric databases, and global identifiers were a step forward. But the Bible warned, the time would come when empires would not hold power only by sword or army, but by record. And that record would become a new form of slavery. In the book of Revelation we read, all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, will receive a mark on the right hand or on the forehead. And without it, no one will be able to buy or to sell. This is not metaphor. This is precise prophecy of a system of control built on identification. The prophets saw a future in which freedom would be defined by access to a database. And today we see it unfolding. Nations are implementing digital passports. Borders no longer require paper documents, now a fingerprint, a face scan, or a QR code is enough. Banks are moving to biometrics. Hospitals demand digital profiles. And every step a person takes leaves a digital footprint. It looks convenient. But in reality, it is a new kind of trap. For who controls this data? Who decides if your profile is active? Who has the power to turn off your identity? Here lies the danger. In ancient times, alliance with Assyria or Babylon meant dependence on armies. Today, alliances mean dependence on databases. And when you lose access, you lose everything. The prophets warned, the final alliance of nations would be built on control. And we see it happening. Countries are making treaties not only about weapons or borders. They are signing agreements on digital security, on data protection, on shared systems of identification. It sounds like progress. But in truth, it builds a global network where every person is reduced to a number. The real reason will never appear in textbooks. Because that would mean admitting that modern alliances are not only politics. They are the creation of a total system deciding who has the right to exist. The archives show, even now nations are exchanging biometric databases, testing global IDs, enforcing unified digital registries. Everything we are told about security is a mask. The true purpose is control. October becomes symbolic once again. In this month we see the launch of new technologies, the signing of global digital agreements, the unveiling of biometric systems. Each time, it is presented as breakthrough. But the prophets would call it sign. The very step that leads to the final alliance of the beast. And what if we are living in the days when the digital footprint itself becomes a new form of slavery? When your freedom is not defined by a passport, but by a code in the system? When your fate depends on whether the database declares you permitted? This is the question we can no longer postpone. Look closely at the world map. All the major powers are introducing digital IDs at the same time. This is not coincidence. It is coordination. And it reveals the truth. The shadows of ancient empires are rising again in a new form. Then they ruled with armies. Today, with data. But the meaning is the same, total dependence. World leaders know, yet they conceal it. They tell us, it is for your convenience. But the scriptures say, it is the mark. And when we read the words about the mark on the hand and on the forehead, we must understand, this is not distant future. This is present reality. The system is already in place. And now I ask you, do you see in digital passports and biometric databases the fulfillment of prophecy? Or do you see only technology? Could this be the very sign the prophets warned about thousands of years ago? Share your thoughts in the comments. For in your words may be the answer the politicians dare not give. We have walked through the entire story. From the ancient alliances with Assyria, Egypt, and Babylon, to the modern agreements signed under the bright lights of diplomatic ceremonies. From the betrayals the prophets called snares, to the digital passports presented today as a new level of security. We have seen how the shadows of ancient empires rise again in global structures that, step by step, build control over the whole world. We were never told the truth. In textbooks, history is painted as progress. In the news, treaties are called historic. In speeches, politicians speak of a new era of peace. But the scriptures tell the opposite. They show us, every alliance built on fear and profit becomes a trap. Every agreement that ignores truth ends in disaster. And every pact that looks like a guarantee of stability is only a step toward the final alliance, the alliance of the beast. The prophets warned. They said, the nations will rage, the kings of the earth will conspire, and all will unite against truth. And we see it happening before our eyes. Today's alliances are not just politics. They are the replaying of a script written thousands of years ago. And if we close our eyes, we become participants in that script. The real reason will never appear in open archives. Because that would mean admitting everything we were told was illusion. We were shown a curtain, while behind it another history unfolded. We were promised peace, but prepared for control. We were promised safety, but given the foundations of new slavery. October has become a symbol. In this month treaties were signed, wars began, revolutions erupted. And each time politicians declared, this is a new beginning. But the prophets remind us, it is only the old pattern repeating. For history does not move forward. It circles back. And with every circle, it moves closer to the end. And now, the uncomfortable question. What if we are living in the very days the prophets described? What if every new treaty is one more step toward the alliance of the beast? What if digital passports are the first fulfillment of the words about the mark on the hand and on the forehead? Are we ready to face that truth? World leaders know, but they conceal it. They call it progress. They call it partnership. But the Bible calls it a snare. And if we fail to see it, we become part of the system preparing the final control. The shadows of ancient empires rise again. And when they rise, it always means one thing: history is reaching its end. We can close our eyes. We can pretend it is only politics. But the prophets speak plainly: when nations form the final alliance, the judgment is near. I will not give the final answer. The mystery remains open. But what do you think? Do you see in these events the very sign the prophets warned about? Or do you believe it is only coincidence, only the rhythm of history and calendar? Leave your comment. I want to know if you see the same signs that I see. If you notice errors in the wording or narration, please forgive them. This voiceover was created with the help of artificial intelligence, and some details may have been distorted. Write in the comments about any mistakes, and I will correct them in the next videos.